So, you've got a host, you've got a router, okay? Please do not judge me in this recording that you're making as far as how I speak. I'm terribly, terribly anxious about that, but it's okay. So, don't make fun of me in your guys' private chat, please. Okay, so, the next thing you need is a switch, okay? So for most of the stuff that you're going to do, you're going to just use this PT switch, okay? It's PT for plain text, and then the switch has several ports on it, okay? Now, what you will see on the config tab, so I just opened up the switch, okay? On the config tab, you will see these interfaces, okay? The PT switch comes default with 6 interfaces. So if you ever have a point where you're going to plug into the switch and says, hey, there's no available port or I can't connect, it's probably because on a PT switch you only have 6 ports, you've got more than 6 connections attached to it, okay? The likelihood of you running into that in this course probably is pretty small since most of the networks we run are pretty small. But if you do run into it, it's probably because it doesn't have enough ports on it. There are other switches to run. So you can do one of 2 things. Either you can make changes. I know you're still not. So you'll get that device is still booting because again it's turning on and it's configuring itself. So if you go to the physical layer, and this is what the back of that switch would look like in real life. Okay? If you don't have enough interfaces, you could do this. You could power it off. Push the little power button. This will turn red, that little light. Okay, just like it would in real life. You can grab an actual interface. Okay, like Gigabit Ethernet, that's what the G stands for, or Fast Ethernet, that's what the F stands for. But these are Ethernet ports, and you can add them to these little blocks. If you try to add them, and it's powered on, it will not let you. Okay, you must power it off first because in real life you would do the same thing. Where you're going to plug in new ports and mount stuff on this switch, you would turn it off. So make sure you turn it off first before you try to drop one of these in here. Okay, so those are some switch things to think about. Now, you have the PC here, okay? I'm zoomed in, so it's a little difficult, but, okay. As far as interfaces go, again, like we talked about before, it only starts out default with these 2 interfaces. You're not going to run any Bluetooth connections in this course, so really the only interface that matters is that Fast Ethernet one for you. Okay. There is nowhere on a PC in Cisco Packet Tracer to mount an additional Ethernet port. In real life, yes, you could mount as many Ethernet ports as you want. For some of you that have had a tower PC, you've seen multiple Ethernet ports. So don't get upset or confused that there's only one. It's just a Cisco Packet Tracerism. Okay? So you've got that one interface. So there's a couple things that you're going to have to configure every single time for every single exercise, for the finals, for anything you're doing on networks that you're going to have to configure. So just like if you were to go into network settings on your computer and click on a particular interface, you would see a screen similar to this. Packet Tracer has a little bit laid out differently, but you have a couple options. If you have a DHCP server running that's sharing a range of IPs, you would change from static to DHCP. On your normal computer at home, what you would see is it says automatically acquire an IP address. Okay, all that is configuring it for DHCP. That's what that means. Most of what you will do in this course for your exercises will be static. I say most because we will do a single DHCP assignment, but for the rest of them, you will do static IP assignments. So you'll click static here. You have to configure a few things. The default gateway, the DNS server, and if you were using IPv6, you would do the same for IPv6. We're going to be using IPv4. So on this screen, on the global settings, right here, global settings, just worry about default gateway and DNS server. Okay? Now, what is the default gateway? Okay? Can somebody tell me what the default gateway should be? What IP should I grab?
The router's
So which interface on the router? What's that? It's so no, we're talking about so I'll give you choices. Is it the internal or the external interface? There you go. Okay, so whatever's the interface that's connected to my local network, that's my internal interface. So the IP that's going to go in default gateway is going to be the IP of the internal interface of my router. Okay, so all the devices on that network need to have the same IP in here in that local network. Okay, what you are going to make a mistake on in the final, and I am going to destroy you, is you are going to put the same default gateway for every single host in the entire network that you configure for the client. They are going to be in their own separate local networks. You're going to have a few hosts over here, a few hosts over here, a few hosts over here. So for each group of those hosts, they should have a different default gateway. Do not copy and paste the same default gateway to every single host. Okay? Your entire thing will not work. Again, I say that. Make sure that you are using the same IP of the internal interface of the router that is connected to that group of hosts. Okay. The DNS server. Now this is the one that's going to be common across an intranet. Okay, and I say intranet very particularly. Okay, because a lot of what you're going to be configuring is intranets, not internets. So an intranet is a network of computers that are combined that work internal to an organization. Okay, so your DNS server, you're likely in most organizations to have one or two DNS servers, a primary and alternate usually. Okay, if you were to open up the network interface card on your PC, you will see that when you're configuring the properties for it, that there's a primary and alternate. Cisco Packet Tracer doesn't worry about a primary and alternate; it worries about that single IP that you're going to put in there. Okay, what is the IP for your DNS server? It is the same IP that you have configured for the local address for that DNS server that you have on your network. Okay, I'll drop one on here in a second, and I'll show that. But it is going to be the same IP as the DNS server that you have posted. Only if you are using DNS settings. So if you're going to be handling DNS in that network, you need to have a DNS server. You need to have a DNS server address. Okay. Then the next thing you will configure for all of your hosts is your IPv4 address. Okay. Again, be very careful. Put the pic. This is the easy part of the exam. Easy points. Okay. In the picture is the IP address you need to put here. Okay. Under each individual host, he's going to give you the IP address. Okay. Make sure you put the IP address in. That is on you. I will teach you as much as I can about routing protocols, but I cannot force you to type the IP address in here. So, when you type an IP address in, so for example, if I'm not using a French keyboard, so when you click on the subnet mask, it'll automatically populate that. In the CLI, on the host, it is doing the same thing. Okay, it's putting in the command IP address 192.168.1.3, and it's assigning it in there. By default, it will give it 255.255.255.0. If you have some sort of subnetted network or distributed network, you could put a custom subnet mask in there. For most of your networks, they're so small, they're all going to be Class C networks, and there's not a whole lot of subnetting you're going to do, because we just don't have the time to do that bulk of a network in the compressed time that you have for the final. So most of the time, it's going to default to 255.255.255.0. Okay, so that is configuring a host. You're going to do that several times on the exam. Okay, over and over again, you're going to configure those hosts, those three addresses: your default gateway, your DNS server, your IPv4 address. Bop, 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 bop. Get very fast at that. So that way, doing that 9 or 10 times doesn't eat up time for when you need to configure the routes. Okay. Now, so we are going to do a router. Okay. Let me zoom just a little bit. You can see the CLI. Okay. So on the on your normal route, the router that you use here, which is called a plain text router, okay, it defaults to having 2 serial ports and 4 fast Ethernet ports. Okay. So if you're configuring a network and you've got 5 or 6 connections on there, you're going to start running out of ports. What it will default to, if you use that little lightning bolt to choose the right physical cable for it, is it will default to serial cable between 2 routers and fast Ethernet to go to all your other network devices. So if you go to a host, if you go to a switch, it'll put it on the fast Ethernet ports. But something that you need to remember in here, again, settings, here's the global settings. Nothing really is set in here except for your system clock, okay? But don't worry about that for right now. As far as your individual interfaces, you're going to assign an IP. Okay, again, my French keyboard gets me every time. So, .1.1. Okay, again, I click subnet mask, it does that. Now, if I look down at the bottom, you will see that this is a mirror of what's happening in the CLI. it put in IP address 192.168.1.1 and then 255.255.255.0. Okay, it configured the IP for that. Now, what you cannot do from the GUI, let's see who's blowing me up. GUI. So you have to go to the CLI. So go over to the CLI. Again, like I said, it's a mirror of what you were just doing in the in the GUI. Okay. So the IP address is here. You're already on interface. How you know is you're on config if. Okay. So keep in mind if you're clicking through and doing IPs for a whole bunch of different interfaces, that you're going to be on the config if of the interface that you last touched over on the GUI. Okay. So for some of you that you're doing all these IPs back and back and back, you need to make sure you go back and select the correct interface. Okay. So in here, make sure you type no shutdown. Okay. You will see that this changed to state down. Why? Because it's not actually connected to anything. Once I connect it to something, it'll change to state up. Then when I go to configure a route, it'll go back down again while we're configuring a route. When the route's fully configured, it will go back to up. This syslog message that you're getting, you'll get a whole bunch of those as you're configuring this router. Okay. So let's do. Did we do OSPF with you guys? No? I won't worry about that yet. Okay. So. Again, front cable's here, front cable's here. So host your switch to your router, router to other routers, okay? If this is your backbone, it might go out to the public internet, but for most of your networks, these are gonna be interconnected stubs, so they're gonna be connected to sections of the rest of your network, so they're router to router, okay? If you hover over it, you'll get a status message here, okay? You'll get all the ports that you've turned up. So you'll see the one that I assigned an IP address. You'll see the one I assigned an IP address to. You'll see its link status is up. That's because I put in the no shutdown command. If it says down there, you need to do one of two things. Either you need to finish configuring a route, or you need to do the no shutdown command. Okay, one of the two things is probably how.
Sometimes if you ain't no shutdown, they still be done.
Because you haven't configured the route yet. So once you finish configuring the route between those two routers, it'll bring it back up. Okay. Okay, so a DNS server. Or DHCP server, or HTTP server, or SMTP server, or any other services that we're gonna handle. Again, same thing. You have to go into interface, assign an IP address to it. It'll default to subnet mask. You go into global settings. It's the same as a PC host. Give it the default gateway, DNS server. Those are all the same. Okay. You go into services. These are the different services. So if you get a question on an exercise or a question on final, it says, hey, I need to configure a server for HTTP or a server for SMTP if you're handling email, or I need to configure a server for DNS or DHCP. It's in this tab, services. Okay. If you were to go over to DHCP, you would go into service and you must turn them on every single time. Turn them on. Okay. For whichever service you're using, whether it's DHCP, which this is IPv4, whether it's DNS. Turn it on. Whether it's SMTP for email, make sure it's turned on. Whether it's FTP, if you're setting up an FTP server, make sure the service is turned on. Before you go and start configuring your DNS, configuring domain names to web addresses, if you're SMTP, configuring user accounts to a domain, make sure that you're turning these features on. Okay. But those are the basics of the things you're going to run through over and over and over again. Okay. When we get to OSPF and BGP, I'll add something onto here, and we're going to talk about routing, setting up those routes for it. Okay. But those are the basics of that.